Comstar, The Rise of Blake. Interstellar Communications play a pivotal role in the political, social, and economic survival of the human race. With mankind now inhabiting hundreds of far-flung worlds, rapid communications has become the essential tie that binds. Through the use of hyperpulse generators, HPGs, mankind has the ability to communicate relatively easily and quickly across the vast reaches of space. Before the invention of the HPG, such communications was possible only through simple codes, and it took months for a message to travel across the stars. The history of Comstar is of course intimately bound to the history of interstellar communications. The Star League, which was the greatest achievement in the history of the human race, could probably not have risen to the heights of a glorious golden age if not for the rapid interstellar communication. Neither the day-to-day administration of the vast union of star systems, nor the dissemination of scientific and technological innovation, nor the colonial expansion would have been possible without the development of this communications technology. Once the reunification war was over, the Star League government set about, in earnest, developing the communications of technology still in use today. The leaders of the Star League knew the importance of interstellar communications and invested a fortune in both time and money to develop newer, faster, and better communications. Without the ability to communicate between worlds, it was possible to conduct neither friendly commerce nor war. During the early years of space exploration, messages from Terra to Tharkad took 2 months to arrive. The hyperpulse generator was essentially a large gun that fired an extremely high-frequency compressed pulse through Kearney-Fukuda space at a target world. The pulse travelled the immense distance instantaneously, just like a ship. Though the energy required for a single transmission was of the same magnitude as a jump, the range of a HPG pulse was 180% to 200% farther than the maximum jump distance. When completed, the system would effectively cut the average communication time between Terra and the farthest flung worlds of the periphery from over a year to less than 5 months. The brand new station transmitted the first HPG message on New Year's Day 2630. In tribute to past communications pioneers, de Burke's first message said, "Watson, come quick, I need you." In less than 2 decades, massive HPG transmitters linked more than 95% of the Terran hegemony worlds. The League's member states were provided with a small number of large transmitters, known as Class A, or prime stations, and with a much greater number of Class B HPG transmitters. Under the Star League Communications Network, known as SL Comnet, all prime stations transmitted to the other prime stations every 6 hours. Class B transmitters transmitted every 12 hours to a maximum of 3 Class A prime stations. The network of Class A stations was known as the First or Prime Communication Circuit, while the Class B stations were known as the Outer Communication Circuit. During the later years of the Star League, the massive Department of Communications had to employ private corporations to provide some of its services. Starlight Broadcasting Limited, for example, provided the necessary personnel to staff the vast SL Comnet's widespread stations. Communications Enterprises Incorporated, based on Terra, was the sole provider of hardware to support the vast, intricate HPG network that held the Star League together. In late December of 2766, Amaris assassinated Richard Cameron, his family, and anyone else with a drop of Cameron blood, while his troops simultaneously seized 95 of the Terran hegemony's 103 worlds. In order to prevent calls for help from reaching the Star League's other member states, Amaris made the capture of the hegemony's HPGs his first priority. During the initial 12 hours of the coup, the Rimworld's Republican forces controlled more than 70% of the HPG stations within the Terran hegemony. Another 20% were destroyed outright rather than risking them falling into the hands of loyalists to warn the rest of the Innisphere of Amaris' treachery. With Terra under his heel, Amaris controlled the very heart of the SL Comnet. He gave explicit orders that the HPG personnel were to be captured rather than killed. He knew how complex and difficult to maintain were the HPG systems themselves. He could capture the equipment, but even a madman like Amaris understood the need for properly trained personnel to run the massive but delicate devices. Most of the hegemony personnel were captured quickly, too stunned by the sudden overthrow of the government to even signal for help. Some did escape and lived in hiding, waiting for the day when the Star League Defense Forces would return. By February 2767, only a handful of trained Star League communications personnel were still alive and free. Most of these survived only by chance, being for one reason or another in one of the other member states. The ranking member amongst this group was the young Jerome Blake. At age 28, he'd been the lead officer at this A station on the planet Oliver. When Stefan Amaris carried out his bloody coup in 2766, Blake was in the Free Worlds League, taking his first holiday in 3 years. At the time of the Amaris coup, Jerome Blake was working for Starlight Broadcasting Limited on permanent assignment with the Starleague Department of Communications. He, like other loyalists, sought out the SLDF and volunteered to assist General Alexander Kerensky's army in any way possible. With the prime communications circuit either disabled or under Amaris control, General Kerensky assigned the young Blake and his fellow technicians the task of devising a way to maintain and use the remaining Class B stations in the inner sphere. On October 10th, 2780, the Council Lords convened in the ruins of Union City to discuss the future of the Starleague. Nicoletta Calderon, with the backing of General Kerensky, nominated Jerome Blake for the position of Minister of Communications. Nicoletta argued that re-establishing the HBG network and maintaining it was of key importance to rebuilding the shattered Starleague. Jerome Blake had proved to be politically neutral and had demonstrated his administrative and organisational skills during the war. Blake wasn't present for the deliberations or even aware of his nomination. During the 2-day proceedings by the High Council, he was overseeing the installation of the primary fusion reactor on Hilton Head Island. When the time came for a final vote, all the House Lords voted to approve Jerome Blake, though John Davian agreed reluctantly. 3 days after General Kerensky's Exodus fleet had left the system, Blake had re-established the prime or first circuit of the former SL Comnet. The planets of New Earth, Barnard, Alpha C, Bryant, Procyon, and Diran became the first new circuit. It seemed a hollow victory, though, because Blake knew that tensions amongst the rival House Lords had now escalated to the point where all-out war was inevitable. In December 2785, he named the technician Konrad Toyama Chief Administrator of the Diran HBG. The young Toyama had joined the Department of Communications shortly after Blake's appointment as minister, and before long had earned the older man's respect. That esteem deepened as Blake observed Toyama's fine leadership in his new, important post. As a member of the newly formed First Circuit, Toyama suggested that the Department of Communications was no longer a suitable name for Blake's organisation. He proposed that the First Circuit adopt the name of Comstar, a blend of Communications Enterprises Incorporate and Starlight Broadcasting Limited, which had formerly sold their services to the Starleague. Blake backed the proposal, and from that point forward, the organisation was known as Comstar. Operation Silver Shield. The rebuilding of the hegemony worlds continued for 2 more years. The First Circuit acted as the only governing body on Terra, assuming control of the former hegemony worlds as well as the ever-growing communications network. As Prime Administrator of the First Circuit, Blake saw the ever-growing armies of the great houses of the Inner Sphere as a threat to the weak and virtually unprotected worlds of the hegemony. In his journal entries, he prophesied that Terra would certainly be an important prize in any war among the former members of the League. As the birth world of humanity, the planet's value was as symbolic as it was strategic, economic, or otherwise. Blake's deepest fear was that all efforts to rebuild would be destroyed once more by the Council Lords' lust for power. In a secret meeting with the First Circuit in the winter of 2786, Blake outlined a daring plan for building a communications network that might survive the violence of the coming wars. Though simple in design, the plan was complex in execution. Dubbed Operation Silver Shield, the plan consisted of 3 key parts. First was to persuade the leaders of the great houses to agree to the neutrality of Comstar facilities, property, and personnel. Second, he would formalise the Comstar letter of credit as a common currency for exchange with all house services. Finally, Blake planned to seize Terra and as many of the surrounding worlds of the hegemony as possible before war engulfed the rest of the Inner Sphere. The action would take the House Lords by surprise, and thus it would succeed. As possessions of Comstar, these planets would be neutral and provide them with resources for possible future expansion. The First Circuit members were initially shocked by the sheer audacity of the plan. Others, however, pushed for an even more militant approach, such as refortifying the hegemony worlds in the event of war. Still others, a small minority, suggested that Comstar sponsor talks with the House Lords with the goal of restoring the League. In the end, Blake persuaded the divided and sceptical First Circuit to back him if his negotiations with the House Lords regarding Comstar's neutrality proved successful. In 2786, he undertook a historic tour to meet with the former Council Lords of the Starleague. The goal of his peace mission was to protect what Comstar had created and rebuilt. Implementing his plan, he told the Lords that the motivation for his visit was to win neutrality for all Comstar facilities and properties in the event of war. In return, Comstar would continue to maintain communication services for a fee, and this fee would be in the form of the new currency, the Comstar Letter of Credit. The introduction of this new scrip had begun a year before with the virtual collapse of the Star League's economic structure. For obvious reasons, Blake hadn't the slightest intention of informing any House leader of his designs to seize and control the former hegemony. The basic agreement outlining the neutrality of Comstar was a simple 3-page document known as the Communications Protocol of 2787. It was signed separately by each of the House Lords, the crowning victory of Blake's diplomatic journey. Though the original document is vague in some areas, it solidly established Comstar's neutrality. Eventually, the Communications Protocol of 2787 merged with other documents written by Blake to become the basis for the Articles of Comstar, the laws governing the Order. The timing of the first 2 phases of Operation Silver Shield was fortuitous. With Kerensky and most of the Star League army vanished from the Inner Sphere, there was nothing standing between the House Lords and all-out war. In December 2786, when Minoru Kurita, coordinator of the Draconis Combine, declared himself the first Lord of the Star League, the other 4 House Lords quickly followed suit. What would one day be known as the First Succession War, a conflagration of unparalleled brutality, had begun. In the next 30 years, the warring leaders of the 5 great houses of the Inner Sphere would cast aside the Ares Convention, smashing cities, destroying vital industrial facilities, and butchering hundreds of millions of civilians. Few worlds would escape unscathed, and all would be affected by the complete disruption of trade, commerce, and communications. While one by one the great houses were entering into the war, Blake met with the First Circuit on March 13, 2788, with revised plans for the military portion of Silver Shield. Instead of attempting to recapture most of the former hegemony, Comstar would now make use of its dwindling resources to seize Terra alone, while stripping all materiel and useful technology from the surrounding worlds. The plan was quickly adopted, and Blake recruited several mercenary battlemech regiments with the promise that they would be paid out of a huge find of spare parts and equipment that would be discovered near Unity City. Blake then arranged to meet with the former SLDF commanders who had promised Kerensky that they would be loyal to Blake, and whose presence on Terra Blake had concealed. Comstar had at its disposal 8 full divisions, half of them mech-equipped, and an assortment of smaller units, but more than enough battlemechs and other vehicles in storage to support a much larger military. Blake appointed General Lauren Hayes of the 151st Royal Battlemech Division, Ulysses S. Grant Division, as the overall commander of operations. Hayes' only true local opposition were several companies of house troops stationed on Terra by the various leaders of the Inner Sphere. They had sent these troops to Terra after the Exodus for internal security reasons, but the units posed a minor threat at best. On June 25th, 2788, 0600 hours Terran Standard Time, all HBG transmitters were shut down. Operation Silver Shield began in silence. The entire event was filmed and documented by Comstar per orders from Blake and the First Circuit. At the end of 72 hours, the First Circuit stations resumed transmission to broadcast scenes of Blake's military takeover of Terra. His willingness to use such blatant force sent a clear message to the former Council Lords that if any of them attempted to attack Terra, it would cost them dearly. Jerome Blake also transmitted a short message to the people of the Inner Sphere. So preoccupied were the House Lords of the Inner Sphere with fighting one another and attempting to gobble up whatever they could find of the fallen Terran hegemony that Blake's announcement took them completely by surprise. Suddenly, they were denied access to Terra, the womb of humanity. Documents uncovered by ROM 3 decades after the operation revealed that Minoru Kurita and Kenyon Marek intended to attempt to seize Terra proper at some point during the First Succession War. The other Inner Sphere leaders would surely have contested this action with military force. Thus, Operation Silver Shield spared Terra further death and destruction. After Blake's transmission, each of the 5 lords sent curt messages to Terra, claiming that Blake had betrayed the intent of their previous accords, but none dared challenge him or his control of Terra. Perhaps each one secretly believed that he or she would have plenty of time to deal with the rebellious Blake, once his or her army had successfully beaten all other opposition.